Hey guys, let's do a little preliminary examination, triage, discussion of this radio that I picked up at the recent 2022 Antique Radio Club of Illinois Radio Fest. Now, I had gone there with the intention of just seeing some folks and recording some video and maybe picking up one or two small items. However, they have a donation area, which is items that are donated and then auctioned off to support the radio club, and there were some great things there. And when I saw this and it was only $5, I figured I had to pick it up. So what is this? This is RCA's first AC powered, meaning you can plug it right into the wall, superheterodyne AM receiver. There were one or two, I believe, slightly earlier DC powered superhets. This is the first AC powered from 1928, I believe. Now, if you've been watching my videos, I did a radio that was basically a Radiola 18 in a very, very similar looking cabinet. In fact, it might be the identical cabinet, but I had the Brunswick version, so it's a little bit different. These are known as coffin radios. This is just before the cathedrals and the tombstones were introduced. Let me turn it around. Right now we're looking at the back side, and I'll give you a better look at it. I believe these were known collectively as coffin radios because of the shape, and they typically have a hinged lid so you can access the stuff inside. It should latch, but I think the mechanism was a little bit damaged. There we go. So why did I pick this up? A few reasons. One, I was interested in having an early superheterodyne. A superhet is a radio that has a local oscillator that mixes with the incoming RF that is then fed into an IF and a detector and then the output stages. In other words, what we are used to if you've worked on radios, All-American 5s, and pretty much every radio you've ever seen me work on. Prior to this, there were regenerative, TRF or tuned radio frequency, crystal sets. Those are all sets that just amplified everything coming in and tried to use a bandpass filter effect to kind of limit. Basically, it was a wideband RF amp that they tried to tame with bandpass filters, and then a detector, and then the output. So this was a real breakthrough. Superhets have far, far better selectivity. I'm not sure about the sensitivity. I would think that'd be pretty much the same, since it's just an RF amp being fed in, and regardless of what type of radio it is. Regeneratives are a little bit different in that they actually introduce some positive feedback to boost the gain. Alright, it looks a bit of a mess inside, and partially that is from myself, because when I got it, I pulled the tubes out to examine them, and I didn't put them back all in their sockets. I don't know anything about this set. For all I know, the power transformer's fried, but I figured, hey, for $5, plus it has a bunch of globe tubes in it, it was definitely worth taking a gamble on. And oddly, coincidentally, the day after I got back from the Radio Fest, somebody sent me an email offering me just the cabinet. I didn't take them up on their offer, one, because this cabinet's in pretty good shape, and two, it was a bit of a drive, and I have to work, so I just didn't seem worthwhile to me. But anyways, if I need it, perhaps it'd be an option. But this cabinet's in pretty good shape, so I don't think I will. Let's talk about that first. I believe it's made out of real solid wood with some veneer. Veneer on the top, veneer on the faces. This is around when things went from shellac to lacquer, so I'm not entirely sure what they would have used on this. There are some simple tests you can do to test what type of finish you had. Basically, you start with the most benign thing first. and see what dissolves. In this case, I believe you would go with denatured alcohol, grain alcohol, which is the solvent used for shellac, which I believe it does not affect lacquer. So I can put that like on the back of an inconspicuous area and see if it has an effect. If it does dissolve, but hey, I know it's shellac. Which should be fine with me because I haven't done a shellac cabinet before, and then I can do some French polishing, but I suspect it's lacquer. Because I will refinish this at some point, at least the trim. So it has dark opaque trim and then probably a dye-based lacquer. Which is, now that I look at it, it's pretty darn deteriorated. So it almost looks tan here, whereas it should be brownish because the lacquer has kind of discolored. I don't know if these are the original knobs. They look a little odd to me, but they could be. And there are two holes here, so I suspect there should be some type of a scutcheon there, similar to what's over here. That's a drag. That I'm going to want to replace. I actually didn't even realize that was missing until now. This will be the power switch, tuning, and volume. That's all you get. I love this part of it. That's a really cool cast brass or bronze escutcheon. Very Art Nouveau Deco kind of look to it. Tuning dial, stiff, but it does work. I'm not going to monkey with it too much because I don't know what condition things are in. Inside, there is a label on the bottom. And there are some holes, and I did see some evidence of mouse activity, rodent activity inside. They may very well have gone up through these holes. But hey, at least all the feet are here. And they're in pretty okay condition. They're kind of, I don't know if these are carved or molded, but they're sort of scalloped feet. I'll give you a close-up look in a moment. What I really want to show you was this label down here. So there's the original label, which is significant because I assume some of these patents have to do with the superhet design. And because RCA had those patents, that's why you see pretty much in every other radio that they had a licensed technology from RCA and pay them a fee. Now, I read that these are tricky to do alignments on. And I suspect that might be what some of these holes are for. And this one appears to be a hole for the wires to come out. Kind of an odd way of doing things. I would have thought they'd have the leads coming out the back of the cabinet, but no, that's how they did it. And these must be what's holding the chassis in place. Closer look at the feet. Looks like there should be a felt pad in the middle. They're pretty well worn away. I'll throw something on there for now so I don't scratch up our floors. Here's a closer look at that escutcheon. Prices for these seem to be all over the place on eBay. I've seen restored beautiful examples going for over 500 bucks. I've seen messed up ones in similar condition for this for under 100. So I figure this falls somewhere in there. We'll know more when we examine the chassis more closely. There's something up with this lead mechanism. This must be a little bit out of alignment. This should catch. I have to kind of manually flip it over to hold it open. So yeah, it smells a little musty inside. There's some nuts and seeds hidden away. If we're lucky, it was just used for storage, but I suspect, especially based on the odor, that there may have been some critters living in here. And it's a bit corroded. Now, if you watched my 5KR that I restored, that thing was ridiculously corroded. And boy, I spent a lot of time stripping. And it had a very similar chassis. These were really corroded in that. And I stripped all the corrosion off and used Bondo and repainted it and all that. So it can be done. It can be done. Also, while I have this out here, I'm going to vacuum all that crap out. Tubes. It would have been nice to have gotten an 80 globe rectifier, but hey, I'm not going to complain. Looks like these three, or no, these two at least, are RCA Radiotrons. This is what it would have come with originally. UI227s. The first digit indicates the manufacturer. I think 3 was Cunningham. I don't recall what the others are. Let's see. I guess 1 was Kenrad. The letters, I think that's kind of lost the time what those mean. Oh, that's the output tube, sorry. Yeah, the UX and UI, I forget what those mean. Here's a Kenrad 27. So these are both the same tube, globe, and then the early ST or shoulder type. They changed the construction for a few reasons. Main one being, in these tubes, the elements inside are only supported at the base. If you drop one of these tend to bend over. These have mica at the top that presses up against the side of the glass. It really stabilizes things. It also has a greatly reduces microphonics. In other words, when the radio's playing and the cabinet's vibrating, that can lead to the entire tube structure inside of this vibrating, which can lead to distorted sound, whereas these do not have that issue. The 71A I'm especially hoping is good because that is an audio output triode, and these are a little bit expensive. Let's see, now we've got another Radiotron 227 Globe, and another Radiotron 227 Globe, and what's this? Probably another Kenrad. So it uses a whole bunch of 27s. The RF amp, the local oscillator, the IF amps, the detectors, all type 27s. And then it just has an 80 for the rectifier, for the AC power supply, and a 71A for the audio output. So pretty simple. And it's a pretty darn simple design, as we will see in a bit when I pull up the schematic for it. We have 3 giant boxes over here. One of them is the AC power transformer. Another one is a big filter choke. And the third one are the capacitors. This is pre-electrolytic capacitor. These capacitors are just tar blocks, paper. Supposedly they used a pretty high-grade paper, maybe imported from Japan, rice paper. And I was reading that they're often still good. And the largest cap in here is only 2 microfarad. I've heard guys say they have theirs playing on the original caps and they work fairly well. But I've also read horror stories where the caps start degrading and the tar starts melting, burned out power transformer, may even start a fire. So I'm not going to plug it in. So what are we looking at here? So that's the power supply, power transformer, filter choke, filter capacitors. That is a rectifier socket. Those 2 pegs there are the output to go to the speaker. Now this is pre-field coil speaker, so the speaker for this would be a needle type where there's a small permanent magnet and a needle that vibrates and goes to a paper cone, a rather thin paper cone. Not the greatest frequency response, not the greatest sounding, but that's what they used back then. I could use the speaker from my Brunswick 5KR. I used to have an RCA 103, I think, but I think I sold it. If I can, assuming that this is restorable, I'd love to get an RCA 106, which I believe is their first field coil, high-end type speaker. And I believe it plugs into the wall, and there's a power supply in it just to power the electromagnet for the speaker. That was their high fidelity, high-end speaker for the day. Another option is to take this high impedance output and put it into a single-ended output transformer and then power a more modern permanent magnet speaker just to increase the fidelity. Because the thing about these superhets is this has better fidelity and bandwidth than the speaker can reproduce. Oh well. Now this looks similar to, say, the Radiola 18 with the tuning caps, but these caps serve a different purpose. In that radio, they are for tuned amplifier stages. And this, one of them will be the variable cap for the local oscillator. And then the other 2 will be for probably a tunable RF front end, and maybe something in the mixer, basically some bandpass filter action on the front end. The IF frequency I think is 175 kilocycles. I'll have to confirm that. Bunch of sockets for all the type 27s. And the final one being the 71A. I think that's the output transformer. And there won't be a whole lot going on under here. There's very few capacitors, very few resistors. Alright, so that's it for this. I'll dig this out in a moment, but let's take a look at the schematic first. Well, let's take a quick look at the service info. Now, if you get a nostalgia error, you may be a little disappointed. They have the service info, but all you get is one page. This is a scan from the writer's compendium of service info, and well, that's a little disappointing. It has, I guess, the essence of what you need. Let me rotate this to get the schematic right side up. By that I mean we have a schematic, we have a description of what this terminal strip is to connect the two chassis, basic alignment info, the tube lineup, and showing the capacitor arrangement inside that box I was talking about. But that's it. Well, let's take a quick look at the schematic and see what we can make out. One thing that is especially odd on these early radios is the way they do the volume. Well, let's go through it anyway. So here's our antenna input. Now it looks like there's a 1K resistor from the antenna going to ground. It's the old resistor symbol. Just an awful lot of squiggles there, whereas nowadays we just use, I think, 3. And there's our 227 RF amp. Here's our 227 local oscillator. These symbols with the line at an angle, that's the part of the variable ganged capacitor. And here are the other two. So RF, well, let's call them input, and then that one's called RF. Really, I think that's RF and that's the mixer. Or maybe that's the mixer and there's two RF front ends. I'm not quite sure why they differentiate input versus RF. Anyways, there's the other two variable caps, so that's forming a bandpass filter. So these are trying to filter the antenna input to the station you're trying to tune in, and this adjusts the local oscillator to be the right frequency to pull in that station. So all three of these need to track together to make this thing get the best reception. After the mixer stage, we have two IF stages, and then we have our detector, and then transformer coupling to the power 71A output, and then output to loudspeaker, which is capacitively coupled. Power supply, here's a power transformer, there's our type 80 rectifier tube, and there's our filter. Notice we only have two 2 microfarad caps. That's pretty darn small, so most of the filtering is done by the big iron filter chokes there. Okay, where's the volume control? It's buried down here. There's a power resistor in there with multiple taps that goes between B plus and B minus, I guess you could say. And that provides the various bias voltages for the 27s. That's where the volume control is. Okay, well there's the variable arm. What's that going to? That's going to ground. What the heck? So, what's on the other side of this? The bottom of this resistor goes to the center tap in the power transformer. This is the lowest potential voltage in the radio. This will be a lower voltage than ground. So this will actually be negative voltage here. Not a lot, minus 10, 15, 20 volts, something like that. And then ground. Notice these filter caps in the power supply do not go to ground. They go to the center tap. It's a common mistake when people recap these tube radios. is quite often the negative side of the caps does not go to ground. Same with this guy. These three caps, they're all going to the center tap. That is not ground. That is more negative than ground. They need that to provide bias voltages for the tubes. Typically you want your grid to be more negative than ground to get the tube in the right operating point. Okay, so how the heck does that, having this ground vary with the B minus and then this other tap going up to the output tube, how does that change the volume? Well, by adjusting this grounding point here, it's going to affect all of these voltages. It's going to change the biasing on these various tubes. It's going to change the gain, the operating point on them. Odd way of doing it. I've seen some older radios where the volume control was actually on the antenna. And instead of this being a fixed 1K resistor, this would be variable, and they would vary the amount of RF coming in from the antenna, and that would be your volume control. It wasn't until a bit later where they put the volume control after the detector to feed it and vary the amount that's fed into the grid of the output tube. Not sure why they didn't do it back then, but I assume they had a reason, so we'll just go with that. So as I said, there aren't many parts. We've got one tapped power resistor here. We've got two on the local oscillator, and we've got a few out here. That's it. Capacitors, we've got two on the power supply. Got a few more here. Basically, they're filtering this bleeder network that's providing various taps for the radio. There's just a little additional filtering there. We've got coupling caps to the output loudspeaker to block DC. We've got one on the detector that's going to take our detected our IF frequency and filter it. And we've got one fixed cap on the local oscillator. We've got trimmers scattered around. These would be to align your IF. This would be to align the local oscillator. And that's it. Okay, if we had to, we could probably muddle our way through just with this service info. However, there's something better. This fantastic resource I've mentioned before, worldradiohistory.com, has scanned lots of publications. One of them is what's come to be known as the Red Books from RCA. This is the OEM servicing info that they published in bound volumes back in the day. And you can download scanned copies of them. I believe what we want is in the 23 to 28. Oh, those are notes, sorry. The service data, we would want this one to cover from 23 to 32. I've already opened it up. It's 274 pages. It took me a while to dig down and finally find the 60 on page 194. Came in two flavors. Sort of an upright console and then the tabletop, which is what we have. Now this has much more detailed info. Not only do we have these nice images of what the radios looked like, but we have lots of great diagrams showing how the wiring harnesses go with the original colors, which are now pretty well gone. They show how the internal capacitors are wired up. Unfortunately, they combine the 62 and the 60, which are a little bit different, so you have to kind of... These are only for the 62. That's the only one we care about. That's for the 60. Inside that box, there are going to be some paper capacitors embedded in a huge block of tar. We'll have to melt that out to rebuild that. Not a lot of fun, but that's what you got to do. Now here's a schematic, which is laid out a little bit differently than the one we were just looking at, but basically it's the same thing. It's just nicer to look at. I'll rotate it again. Now, I mentioned that there was a fancier type of field coil speaker. If you got the, well, I guess that would come with the 62, or you can buy just the speaker unit and use it with the Model 60. This is what I meant about how the field coil is kind of part of the, or it's powered right off the line, and they actually have a copper oxide bridge rectifier, full bridge rectifier in there It's kind of crazy, but basically you're plugging your speaker into the wall outlet. And let's keep going. I'll rotate it back. And we get more diagrams and tube charts and some voltages at various test points. More detailed alignment procedure. So we'll be using this, assuming we can actually get this thing running again. So this is nice to have, that's for sure. I undid all the chassis bolts from below. I went to pull out the chassis and realized, oh wait a minute, they're wired together. I had noticed that because the wiring terminal was covered up by the steel plate, held in by two screws that were really rusted up, and I couldn't get them out. Luckily, some penetrating oil sprayed on, let it sit for about an hour, and then I was able to get the screws out. And underneath that, the terminal strip was actually in pretty darn good shape. So I just had to loosen up the screws. The wiring doesn't look too bad. However, the chassis are nastier than I realized at first, especially around the 80 rectifier tube socket. There was definitely a rodent nest in there. So this might not be quite as bad as the Brunswick I did about 8, 9, 10 years ago, but it's pretty bad. Luckily, rust removers have improved a lot. Back then I used basically a mixture of hydrochloric and phosphoric acid applied over the course of several days of applying it, letting it dissolve for a while, wiping it off, and using some physical abrasion to bust up the rust. Nowadays, there are products like Evapo-Rust that work in a different method that is not acid-based, does not harm other materials. So I'll just fill up a bucket with one of the newer rust removers and just submerge the entire chassis and leave it there for a couple days. That's assuming it looks good enough to restore. So without further ado, should be able to get this out now. So it looks like because you have to rotate it to pull it out. Oh, what the heck? There are two wires. I have to go over to the speaker jacks. Oh, no, it was just... Oh, is that the antenna? It's going through the hole in the bottom and going out. Yeah, I think that's either just spliced in. I grab some wire cutters and just cut those wires so I can get it out. Alrighty. Yeah, it's not so bad. There's some fluff, especially around the volume control, but otherwise it looks to be in pretty good shape. Interesting that it has 3 coils like the earlier TRF set does. Well, it's kind of an odd looking component. I think that's a capacitor, but I'm not entirely sure. Those are obviously dog bone resistors. Alright, so I suspect the other chassis is going to be a bit nastier. Pull the speaker. So these are the pins that would originally go into the speaker. With some very flexible, fine wires attached to these. They're broken off at some point. And this, which is a power cord going to this. which is relatively modern. I'm just going to cut that off. So somebody had done some work on this, at least replaced some of the wiring, but that only get recapped it or anything. And that's not bad underneath, because it's basically impenetrable. So they spliced in the new power cord. These various things here, those are the tapped power resistors. On the schematic it looks like one resistor, but it's actually several connected in series. Alright, that's actually not too horrific. It's really just around the 80 rectifier socket. Alright. Now they made enough of these. They're not super rare that, you know, I've pretty much already decided that I'm gonna go for it. And if I need to get a part or two between eBay and Antique Radio Forum and various local radio clubs, I think I can get it going. Finally, let's check some tubes. Now, I already did find a seller on eBay who specializes in antique radio parts, and he has the escutcheon I need. It's about 25 bucks plus 5 shipping, so brings my total cost of the radio from $5 to $35 if I choose to purchase it. And you know, parting out a radio, no, it's not the greatest thing, but that's where you get spare parts from. So all these radios that were left at that swap meet, it's either landfill or, yeah, maybe somebody would get one for free and part it out and sell all the parts on eBay, 20, 25 bucks a pop. Hey, you know, it's providing a service, took the effort when no one else was willing to, so I'm okay with that. Now, all these tubes are basically type 27, so testing should go pretty quick. Now, I talked about submerging that chassis JR3204 in a bucket. Yes, there was a power transformer, so I would want to make sure that that was either protected so it wouldn't get any moisture in it, or make sure it's thoroughly dried out after the fact. I'm using my trusty Hickok 600A tube tester that I overhauled a few years ago. 404148. I got these right. 32040, 27, 32040, 4148, 2.5. I don't think I was making good contact. Something. It's starting to wake up. Should really let each tube sit for a few minutes. Alright. This tube looks promising. Always check for shorts before you check for emissions. Because you could damage your tester if you have a short when you check for emissions. This tube broke up quite nicely. Interesting. So this 27, it just has those elements, just standing up straight, no support. This has a mica disc around the top, but it doesn't appear to extend all the way to the glass envelope, but it would provide some protection from it bending over very far. I don't think I've ever seen a mica disc inside of a globe tube before. Ooh. Looked like we had a short for a moment there, but then it went away. If there is a short, this neon light will stay illuminated. Well, that's really good. Radiotron UI227. Bases are slightly different. This has a dash on either side of the UI, the one on my right hand, the one on my left does not. And the internal structures are quite different. All the 27s tested good. Now let's do the 71A, which runs on 5 volts, whereas all the 27s will run on 2.5 volts. So, lighting up. Twin filaments in there. Has a much larger plate than the 27s do, this being a power output tube. Should probably boost my line a little. Well, not really. The line adjust is still pretty good. What can sometimes happen if it's a tube that draws a bit of power is it will load down the whole device and you have to tweak the line adjust. Sort of a manual voltage regulator. Well, not sort of, that's exactly what it is. Ooh, fantastic. Alrighty. Alright, that's going to be it for now. When we pick up, hopefully I will have secured the missing escutcheon. And we'll have examined these chassis more closely. We'll do some continuity tests on the transformers and chokes and the output transformer. And maybe start removing the corrosion. Hope you enjoyed this look. The first look at this Radiola 60 from 1928. RCA's first AC powered superheterodyne receiver.